The groom was smiling, ready to kiss his bride. Then, the church doors didn't just open, they were kicked off the hinges. It wasn't a protest. It was an eviction. Dante didn't bring a weapon. He didn't need one. He walked straight to the altar, looked the groom in the eye, and spat on the floor. "Step aside, boy," he growled. "You're playing with a man's toy. I'm the one putting the ring on her finger today, and if you breathe too loud, you won't live to see the reception." It's not the interruption. It's what the bride did next. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She looked at her trembling groom, then at the Mafia king, and whispered 5 words that changed everything. "What took you so long? Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe." The air in the cathedral was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the suffocating tension of a vow left hanging in the balance. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird as she looked at David, the man she was supposed to marry. He looked pathetic, his tuxedo was perfect, but his soul was transparent. Then, the heavy oak doors didn't just open, they groaned as they were forced back by men who didn't care about the sanctity of the house of God. Dante Moretti walked in like he owned the air everyone was breathing. He didn't have a gun drawn, and he didn't need one. His presence alone was a weapon of mass destruction. The clicking of his Italian leather shoes on the marble floor was the only sound in the silent church, a rhythmic countdown to the end of David's life as he knew it. Behind Dante, a man in a sharp gray suit followed, carrying a slim leather briefcase and a tablet. Dante didn't stop at the pews. He walked right past the gasping aunts and the bewildered bridesmaids, stepping onto the altar as if it were a stage built specifically for his arrival. He stood inches from David, who had turned a sickly shade of gray. "Step aside, boy," Dante growled. His voice was a low, textured vibration that seemed to rattle the stained glass windows. David stammered, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Dante, you can't be here. This is a private ceremony. This is God's house." Dante's lips curled into a cold, mirthless smile. He tilted his head slightly, never taking his eyes off David's trembling form. "God's house?" He gestured vaguely to the man in the gray suit. "Marcello, fix that." The assistant stepped forward, his fingers flying across the tablet. "It's done, boss. The deed, the land, and the endowment. $100 million has just been transferred to the Archdiocese's emergency fund. The contract is signed. As of 30 seconds ago, this building and everything inside it, including the pews you're standing on, belongs to Moretti Holdings." The congregation erupted in a frantic whisper, but Dante silenced them with a single, sharp glance. He turned back to David, his expression one of pure, unadulterated boredom. "You're trespassing on my property, David. And I don't like trespassers touching my things." With a flick of his wrist, Dante reached out and gripped David's chin, forcing the younger man to look him in the eye. "You thought you could use her to pay off your filth? You thought you could put a cheap ring on her finger and call her yours?" Dante's grip tightened, and David let out a small, whimpering sound. "The only reason you're still breathing is that I don't want to ruin the carpet I just bought. Now, get out before I change my mind about the no-blood policy." David didn't wait for a second invitation. He stumbled back, nearly tripping over the train of Maya's dress, and scrambled down the altar. He didn't look back at Maya. He didn't look at the guests. He simply ran, the doors swinging shut behind him with a final, heavy thud. The silence that followed was even heavier than before. Dante finally turned his gaze to Maya. His eyes were dark, swirling with an intensity that made her breath hitch. He didn't ask her for permission. He didn't wait for the priest to continue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring box. When he flicked it open, the light from the chandeliers caught a diamond so large and flawless it made the one David had bought look like a piece of jagged glass. "I told you," Dante whispered, his voice for her ears only as he reached for her hand. "If you're going to be a queen, you shouldn't be marrying a peasant." Maya felt the warmth of his hand against hers, a stark contrast to David's cold, sweaty grip. She looked at the ring, then up at the man who had just spent $100 million just to humiliate her groom. "You're late," she whispered. The heavy silence of the cathedral was broken only by the sound of Maya's own shallow breathing. Dante didn't slide the ring onto her finger immediately. Instead, he held it between two fingers, letting the brilliance of the stone mock the ghost of the ceremony that had just collapsed. He looked toward the back of the church, where David had disappeared, and a flicker of genuine disgust crossed his features. "You're wondering why he ran so fast," Dante said, his voice dropping to a velvet edge that cut through the stillness. "You're wondering how a man who swore to love you until death could vanish before the echoes of his own vows had even faded." Maya looked at the empty doorway, then back at the man holding her hand like a trophy. "He was scared of you, Dante. Everyone is." "He wasn't scared of me," Dante corrected, stepping closer until the scent of expensive tobacco and cedarwood enveloped her. "He was scared because the contract was up. David isn't a groom, Maya. He's a line item on a balance sheet. He's an actor who was paid to play a role because you needed a shield, and your father was too much of a coward to tell you the truth." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Maya felt the blood drain from her face as she shook her head. "That's a lie. We met 3 years ago. We had a life." Dante let out a short, dry laugh that didn't reach his eyes. 3 years ago, the Dragiv family put a price on your head to get to me. Your father knew he couldn't protect you, and he knew I was too far away to keep you in my sight every second. So, he hired a ghost. He hired a man with no past and no future to stand by your side, to give you a name that wasn't yours, and to keep you hidden in plain sight. David didn't love you. He was a rent-a-groom, a professional decoy designed to make the world think you were just another boring housewife in the making. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper, tossing it onto the altar. Maya's eyes scanned the document. It was a ledger, dated 3 years prior, showing monthly payments to a shell corporation linked to David's real name. The final payment was marked for today. The wedding wasn't the beginning of their life, it was the expiration date of his services. "The Dragivs found out last week," Dante continued, his voice hardening. "They realized the quiet life you were living was a sham. They were coming for this church today, Maya. Not to celebrate, but to turn this white dress red." David knew it. That's why he was shaking. He wasn't crying because he was happy. He was sweating because he knew his protection detail was over and he was about to be caught in the crossfire. Maya felt a wave of nausea. Every memory of the last 3 years, the quiet dinners, the shared dreams, the plans for a family, began to dissolve into a sea of cold, hard transactions. David hadn't been her partner, he had been a paid employee, a human camouflage. "He was going to leave you at the reception," Dante whispered, stepping so close his chest nearly brushed hers. "He was going to take the final check and vanish, leaving you to the wolves. I didn't crash this wedding to be a villain, Maya. I crashed it because the man you thought was your savior just sold your location to the highest bidder to save his own skin." Dante finally took her hand again, his grip firm and grounding. He didn't ask for her consent this time. He slid the massive diamond onto her ring finger, the weight of it feeling like a shackle and a shield all at once. "The charade is over," he said, his eyes locking onto hers with a possessive fire. "You don't need a decoy anymore. You have the real thing. Now, let's get you out of here before the people who actually want you dead realize I've already moved the target." The transition from the holy silence of the cathedral to the predatory hum of Dante's armored SUV felt like a descent into another dimension. Maya sat in the back seat, the heavy lace of her sleeve scratching against her skin, while the man who had just bought her life sat beside her, radiating a cold, magnetic power. He didn't look at her. He was busy barking orders into a phone in a language that sounded like grinding stones. Outside, the city blurred into a streak of gray and neon, but as they began to ascend the winding, private roads of the coastal cliffs, the world fell away entirely. The black estate didn't look like a home, it looked like a warning. Massive obsidian gates swung open without a sound, revealing a fortress of glass and steel perched precariously over the churning Atlantic. Armed men in tactical gear stood at every corner, their faces as expressionless as the stone walls. As the car came to a halt, a man opened Maya's door, offering a hand that felt more like a restraint than a courtesy. Dante stepped out and waited for her at the base of the grand marble staircase. "Welcome home, Maya," he said, though there was no warmth in the greeting. "Try not to get lost. Most of the doors here stay locked for a reason." As she stepped into the foyer, the sheer scale of the place made her feel small, insignificant. The ceiling soared 30 feet high, and the walls were lined with art that looked like it belonged in a museum, or a vault. But it was the silence that was most unsettling. It wasn't the peaceful silence of her old life, it was the heavy, watchful silence of a place where secrets were buried alive. Dante led her into a vast study overlooking the ocean. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a crystal glass and finally turned to face her. The flickering light from the fireplace cast long, dancing shadows across his face, making him look more like a myth than a man. "You look like you're waiting for an apology," he remarked, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Or perhaps an explanation." "I want to know when I can leave," Maya said, her voice steadier than she felt. She twisted the heavy diamond on her finger, the cold metal a constant reminder of her new reality. Dante's eyes darkened, a small, dangerous smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. He set the glass down on a mahogany desk and walked toward her with the slow, deliberate grace of a panther. He didn't stop until he was deep in her personal space, his shadow completely eclipsing her. "Leave," he repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a chill down her spine. "You still don't understand, do you? You spent 3 years hiding behind a coward who was paid to blink. That world is gone. The Dragovs know who you are now. The moment you step outside those gates without my men, you're a corpse." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a touch that was unexpectedly soft, yet felt like a threat. "I didn't bring you here to be my wife in some fairy tale, Maya. I brought you here because you are the most valuable piece on the board. To the world, you're the woman who just married a monster. To me." He leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You're the only bait delicious enough to bring my enemies out of their holes." Maya flinched, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fury. "You used me. You're no better than David." Dante didn't deny it. Instead, he gripped her waist, pulling her flush against his suit jacket. "David used you for a paycheck. I'm using you to win a war. There's a difference." He looked down at her, his gaze possessive and absolute. "You aren't a prisoner here, Maya. You're a guest of the crown. But don't mistake my protection for freedom. In this house, my word is the only law. Get used to the cage, it's the only thing keeping you alive." The velvet trap of the Black Estate was supposed to be impenetrable, a sanctuary of stone and silicon where the world couldn't reach her. But desperation has a way of making cowards feel like heroes. Maya was standing on the balcony of her third-floor suite, watching the moonlight fracture against the Atlantic waves, when a shadow moved in the gardens below. It wasn't the rhythmic, disciplined patrol of Dante's guards. It was erratic, desperate, and familiar. A heavy hand landed on her shoulder, and she nearly screamed, but Dante was already there, leaning over her shoulder to look down at the intruder. He didn't look surprised. He looked amused, the way a lion looks at a mouse that has wandered into its den by mistake. "Your hero has returned," Dante whispered, his voice vibrating through her back. It seems David decided that $50 million wasn't enough to keep him away from his blushing bride. In the courtyard below, David emerged from the shadows of the hedges. He looked frantic, his tuxedo jacket gone and his shirt stained with dirt. In his hand, he clutched a small, silver folding knife, the kind of tool one might use to peel an apple, not to storm a fortress. He was shouting her name, his voice thin and cracking against the roar of the ocean. "Maya. I'm coming for you. Dante, you monster, let her go." Dante didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't call the guards over the radio. Instead, he gripped Maya's hand and led her down the grand staircase, through the foyer, and right out the front doors onto the wide marble terrace. David froze, the blade in his hand looking pathetic under the floodlights. "Stay back!" David yelled, pointing the small knife at the man who controlled half the city. "I know your secrets, Dante. I'll tell everyone what you did." Dante stepped forward, leaving Maya by the door. He walked with his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, almost bored. The guards in the shadows raised their rifles, but Dante gave a slight shake of his head. He wanted this audience. He wanted the humiliation to be absolute. "And what exactly did I do, David?" Dante asked, his voice carrying effortlessly across the space. "Did I pay your gambling debts? Did I keep you fed for 3 years while you played house with a woman you were too weak to protect? Or did I give you an out today that you were too stupid to take? I love her!" David screamed, lunging forward with a sudden, clumsy burst of speed. Dante didn't even flinch. As David swung the tiny blade, Dante moved with a speed that was a blur of black silk and raw power. He caught David's wrist in a grip that sounded like dry branches snapping. The knife clattered to the marble. In the same motion, Dante drove a knee into David's midsection and spun him around, forcing him to his knees with his arm twisted painfully behind his back. Dante didn't finish him. Instead, he looked back at Maya, who was watching from the terrace, her hands pressed to her mouth. "Look at him, Maya," Dante commanded, his voice cold and echoing. "This is the man you are going to trust with your life. He didn't come here with an army. He didn't come here with a plan. He came here with a toy, hoping he could play hero one last time before the real monsters found him." Dante leaned down, whispering something into David's ear that made the younger man's eyes widen in sheer, unadulterated terror. Then, with a casual shove, Dante sent him sprawling into the dirt. "Go," Dante said, wiping his hands as if he had touched something diseased. "Run back to the FBI, or the Dragovs, or whoever is still foolish enough to pay for your lies. But if I see your shadow on my property again, I won't just break your wrist. I'll make sure you're buried under the foundation of the next church I buy." David scrambled to his feet, sobbing, and ran into the darkness of the woods. Dante turned back to Maya, the moonlight catching the jagged scar on his neck. He walked up the stairs, stopped an inch from her, and tilted her chin up to meet his gaze. "First blood goes to the fool," he said, his thumb brushing over her lower lip. "But don't cry for him, Maya. He wasn't trying to save you. He was trying to silence the only witness to his failure." The silence following David's pathetic retreat was louder than his screams had been. Dante didn't lead Maya back to her room. Instead, he guided her deep into the heart of the estate, to a private gallery bathed in the amber glow of recessed lights. He stopped before a portrait draped in heavy velvet. With a slow, deliberate pull of a cord, the fabric fell, revealing the face of a woman who looked so much like Maya it felt like looking into a haunted mirror. "My mother," Maya whispered, her fingers ghosting over the air in front of the canvas. "How do you have this?" "Because before she was your mother, she was the only reason I survived the streets of Naples," Dante said, his voice losing its jagged edge for the first time. He stood beside her, his gaze fixed on the painted eyes of the woman from his past. 20 years ago, I was a foot soldier for a family that didn't care if I lived or died. I was gutted in an alleyway, left to bleed out in the rain. Your mother, Elena, found me. She didn't call the police. She didn't look away. She dragged me into her basement and sewed me back together with a sewing needle and a bottle of cheap vodka. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a weathered, yellowed envelope. It wasn't a contract or a ledger, it was a letter, handwritten in a delicate, familiar script. She knew what your father was, Dante continued, his jaw tightening. She knew he was a man who gambled with things that didn't belong to him. She knew that one day, his debts would exceed his worth, and the wolves would come for the only thing he had left, you. So, she made me a promise. She saved my life, and in return, she asked for yours. Maya took the letter, her hands trembling as she recognized her mother's writing. Dante, it read, when the time comes, don't let her be sold. Claim the debt. Be the monster that keeps the other monsters away. The debt isn't money, Maya, Dante said, turning to face her. The shadows of the gallery made his features look carved from stone. The hidden debt was a blood oath. Your father tried to sell you to the Dragovs to clear his accounts, thinking I wouldn't find out. He didn't realize I'd been paying his bills for a decade just to keep you in that quiet, fake little life until I was powerful enough to take you for good. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The rent-a-groom, the quiet life, the sudden interruption, it wasn't a series of accidents. It was a 20-year-old plan reaching its climax. Dante hadn't crashed her wedding on a whim. He had been waiting for the exact moment the world became too dangerous for her to exist without him. You've been watching me my whole life, she breathed, a mixture of horror and a strange, dark comfort washing over her. I've been protecting my investment, Dante corrected, though the look in his eyes was anything but professional. He stepped closer, the heat radiating from his body. Your mother didn't want you to marry a good man like David. She knew a good man would get you killed. She wanted you with someone who had enough blood on his hands to make the rest of the world stay back. He took the letter from her shaking fingers and tucked it away. The wedding was the end of your father's control. Now, you belong to the oath I made to Elena. You aren't here because of a gambling debt. You're here because 20 years ago, a woman showed mercy to a killer, and today, that killer is the only thing standing between you and a shallow grave. The weight of the blood oath hung in the air long after they left the gallery, but there was no time for Maya to process the ghost of her mother's bargain. By midnight, the estate was a hive of controlled chaos. Dante had received a gift at the gates, a black envelope sealed with red wax, delivered by a man who had vanished before the guards could blink. It was an invitation from Viktor Dragov, the patriarch of the family that had been hunting her. He wasn't calling for war, he was calling for a parley. He wants to see the woman who was worth $100 million church, Dante said, his eyes scanning Maya as she stood in the center of her dressing room. He wants to see if you're a queen or just a gilded bird. If he senses a single drop of fear, we won't make it past the appetizers. Dante had discarded his wedding suit for a charcoal three-piece that looked like armor. He signaled to a team of stylists who moved with surgical precision, stripping Maya of the innocent lace of her wedding gown and replacing it with a floor-length silk dress the color of spilled wine. It was backless, dangerous, and clung to her like a second skin. They slicked her hair back and painted her lips a shade of crimson so deep it was almost black. Tonight, you don't speak unless I look at you, Dante commanded, stepping behind her to clasp a diamond choker around her neck. His fingers were cold against her skin. You don't flinch when you see a blade, and you don't look at the guards. You look at Viktor like he's dirt beneath your heels. Can you do that, Maya? Or was David right about you? The mention of the coward's name acted like a spark to dry wood. Maya met Dante's gaze in the mirror, her eyes hardening. David didn't know me at all. And neither do you. Dante's lips quirked into that dark, satisfied smirk. Good. Keep that fire. You'll need it. The dinner was held at a neutral location, a hollowed-out cathedral-turned-restaurant that felt more like a tomb than an eatery. Armed men lined the walls, their hands hovering near their holsters. Viktor Dragov sat at the head of a long mahogany table, his face a map of scars and old grudges. He didn't rise when they entered. He simply watched, his predatory gaze moving from Dante to Maya. So, Viktor rasped, his voice sounding like a shovel hitting gravel. The stolen bride. I heard you traded a coward for a king, little girl. Tell me, is the bed at the Black Estate as comfortable as they say? The table went silent. Dante's hand tightened on the back of Maya's chair, his knuckles turning white. It was a test, a blatant insult designed to see if Maya would crumble or if Dante would lose his temper. Maya didn't wait for Dante to respond. She leaned forward, the silk of her dress shimmering under the dim chandeliers. She picked up her wine glass, her hand steady as a surgeon's, and took a slow, deliberate sip. The bed is fine, Viktor, Maya said, her voice cool and carrying through the vaulted room. But I find the company much more interesting than the furniture. Though, I suppose a man who spends his time hiding behind paid informants wouldn't understand the appeal of real power. Victor's eyes narrowed, the air in the room turning ice cold. Behind him, two of his men stepped forward, but Victor raised a hand to stop them. He let out a low, dry chuckle. "She has teeth, Dante," Victor remarked, leaning back. "I can see why you didn't want to share." "She isn't for sharing," Dante replied, his voice a lethal warning. The rest of the meal was a dance on a razor's edge. Maya played her part to perfection, leaning into Dante's side, whispering into his ear, and treating the most dangerous men in the city with a bored indifference that infuriated them. But as they walked back to the car, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a chilling realization. She wasn't just hiding from the Mafia anymore. She was becoming one of them. The adrenaline from the dinner with Victor Dragov hadn't fully ebbed when they returned to the estate. Maya felt a strange, restless energy vibrating under her skin. She retreated to her dressing room, the wine-colored silk dress suddenly feeling like a heavy, suffocating second skin. She reached back to unzip the garment, but her fingers caught on something hard and cold tucked into the intricate lace of the bodice, something that hadn't been there when she put it on. She pulled it out. It was a small, high-tech tracking chip, no larger than a fingernail. Panic flared, but she didn't call for Dante. Instead, she remembered the moment it could have been planted. It wasn't at the restaurant. The stylists at the estate were Dante's people. The only other person who had touched her dress was her sister, Sophia, during that frantic hour before the wedding ceremony began. Sophia had insisted on fixing the hem, her hands trembling as she fussed over the lace. Maya's breath hitched. She navigated the darkened corridors of the estate toward Dante's private office. She didn't knock, she threw the chip onto his mahogany desk. It skittered across the polished surface and came to a stop right in front of his glass of scotch. "My sister," Maya said, her voice brittle. "Sophia put it there." Dante didn't look surprised. He picked up the chip, rolling it between his thumb and forefinger. "I know. My security team flagged her phone records an hour ago. She hasn't been talking to the Dragovs, Maya. She's been talking to David." "David?" Maya whispered, sinking into the leather chair opposite him. Why would she help him after he ran? "Because David isn't just a coward, he's a manipulator," Dante said, his expression darkening. "He told Sophia that I kidnapped you. He told her he was working with the authorities to bring you home, but he needed a way to track your location inside the estate. He played on her love for you to turn her into a mole. He tapped a key on his laptop and turned the screen toward her. It was a series of intercepted text messages. "I have the location," one read. "Tell the others to get ready. She's in the Black Estate." The betrayal cut deeper than the lies of a rent-a-groom. Sophia was her blood, her only link to a life that wasn't defined by violence and debt. And now, Sophia was the reason the wolves were at the door. "What are you going to do to her?" Maya asked, her heart racing. Dante stood up, walking around the desk to stand over her. He didn't offer comfort. Instead, he placed a hand on the back of her chair, pinning her in place. "The question isn't what I'm going to do, Maya. The question is what you are going to do. Sophia didn't just betray me, she betrayed you. She gave your location to the man who was ready to leave you for dead." He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "David didn't give that tracker to the police. He gave the frequency to a hit squad. Your sister didn't just sign my death warrant, she signed yours. In my world, treason is a capital offense. But since she's your blood, I'll give you a choice." "A choice?" "We use the tracker," Dante said, his voice a low, lethal purr. "We feed them a false location. We lure David and whoever he's working for into a trap. But for that to work, you have to be the one to call Sophia. You have to tell her exactly where we're going to be. You have to look your sister in the virtual eye and lie to her, knowing that the men who follow that signal won't be coming back." Maya looked at the chip on the desk. The transition was complete. To save herself, she had to sacrifice the last piece of her innocence. She reached out and picked up the tracker. "Give me the phone," she said. The air inside the abandoned dockside warehouse was thick with the smell of salt, rust, and the metallic tang of impending violence. Maya sat on a lone wooden chair in the center of the vast, hollow space, illuminated by a single flickering bulb. She still wore the wine-colored silk, but her hands were no longer trembling. In her pocket, the tracker pulsed with a silent, treacherous rhythm, a beacon for the men she had once called family. Dante was nowhere to be seen, a ghost in the rafters, but she could feel his presence in the heavy silence. He had told her to wait for the moment the doors opened, to look for the truth in the eyes of the man who claimed to love her. The heavy rolling metal door groaned as it was forced upward. A sliver of moonlight cut through the darkness, followed by the silhouettes of 6 men. At the front, looking frantic and disheveled, was David. He wasn't accompanied by the police or federal agents. Beside him stood 3 men with the distinct, jagged tattoos of the Drag of Syndicate on their necks. "Maya!" David shouted, his voice echoing off the corrugated steel walls. He ran toward her, but stopped 10 feet away when he realized she wasn't tied up. She was just sitting there, watching him with an expression that made his blood run cold. "Maya, thank God. We have to move. The men are outside. We're going to get you out of here." "The men outside aren't police, David," Maya said, her voice steady and hollow. "They're Drag of soldiers. Why are you with them?" David flinched, his eyes darting to the armed men behind him. It was the only way. Dante is too powerful. I had to make a deal. They just want him, Maya. They told me if I helped them find you, they'd let us go. We can have our life back. Our life was a transaction, she replied, standing up slowly. The silk of her dress hissed against the floor like a snake. You didn't come here to save me. You came here to deliver me to the people who want to use me as a bargaining chip. You used my sister, David. You turned Sophia into a traitor. I did it for us. David screamed, his face contorting into a mask of pathetic rage. He turned to the Drag of soldiers. She's right there. Take her. Just give me the money and let me leave. A low, dark chuckle vibrated from the shadows above. A second later, Dante dropped from the catwalk, landing with the grace of a predator. He didn't even look at the soldiers, his eyes were locked on David. Simultaneously, the warehouse's red emergency lights flared to life, revealing Dante's own men emerging from behind the crates, their weapons already leveled. The Drag of soldiers didn't even have time to raise their rifles. In a synchronized burst of suppressed gunfire, they were neutralized before they could let out a breath. David fell to his knees, the small silver knife clattering to the floor for the second time that week. He looked up at Dante, then at Maya, his mouth hanging open in a silent plea. Dante walked over to the small table where the tracker lay. He picked it up and crushed it between his fingers. You're a special kind of parasite, David, Dante said, his voice a lethal whisper. Most men run when they're beaten. You came back to sell the woman you pretended to love to her executioners. Dante pulled a sleek, black handgun from his holster and held it out, grip first, toward Maya. The metal glinted under the red lights. He's the man who betrayed your sister. He's the man who put a target on your back, Dante said, his eyes burning into hers. In the underground, we don't leave loose ends. Decide his fate, Maya. Does he walk out of here, or does he stay in the shadows forever? Maya looked at the gun, then at the sobbing man on the floor. David was no longer a person to her, he was a mistake she needed to erase. She reached out, her fingers wrapping around the cold grip of the weapon. She felt the weight of the Mafia queen's crown settling onto her head, heavier and more permanent than any wedding veil. The warehouse fell into a tomb-like silence as Maya stared down the barrel of the weapon. David's whimpering was the only sound, a pathetic, rhythmic gasping that grated against her nerves. She looked at his tear-streaked face and felt nothing, no anger, no love, just a cold, clinical detachment. She didn't pull the trigger. Instead, she handed the gun back to Dante, her eyes never leaving the man on the floor. "He's not worth the ammunition," Maya said, her voice like ice. "Throw him to the dragons. Let them deal with the man who failed to deliver their prize." David's scream of terror was cut short as Dante's men dragged him into the darkness. Dante watched her for a long moment, a flicker of something, admiration, perhaps, crossing his face before he signaled for the extraction. But the victory was short-lived. As they stepped out into the damp night air, the silence was shattered by the sharp, rhythmic crack of a sniper rifle. The glass of the SUV shattered. Dante didn't shout, he didn't even flinch. He simply pivoted, throwing his body over Maya's to shield her as they dove behind the heavy metal door of the vehicle. "Get in. Drive." Dante roared to his men, but as he pulled Maya into the back seat, his hands slipped. She felt it before she saw it, a warm, sticky wetness blooming across the silk of her dress. When the car sped away into the night, the interior lights flickered on, revealing the truth. The charcoal suit jacket was soaked through. Dante was slumped against the leather, his breathing shallow and jagged, his face losing its bronze hue and turning a terrifying shade of ash. "Dante," she breathed, her hands flying to the wound in his side. "Dante, look at me." "I'm fine," he gritted out, but the hand he tried to raise fell limp against his lap. The monster, the man who had bought a church and crushed a syndicate without breaking a sweat, was bleeding out in her arms. By the time they reached a secure safe house, not the Black Estate, but a hidden villa tucked away in the hills, Dante was slipping in and out of consciousness. The doctor was miles away, delayed by the same ambush that had nearly killed them. Maya didn't wait. She stripped off the wine-colored silk, her hands steady as she barked orders at the guards. She found the medical kit in the master suite. The man who had once told her she was just bait was now completely at her mercy. As she cut away his shirt, she saw the map of his life written in scars, the sewing needle marks from her mother's basement, the jagged lines of old betrayals. He looked human. He looked vulnerable. "You're going to be fine," she whispered, more to herself than him, as she pressed a thick pad of gauze against the exit wound. Dante's eyes fluttered open, his hand weakly catching her wrist. His grip, once iron, was now a ghost of itself. "Maya," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the sound of the pouring rain outside. "The safe, behind the portrait, code is your birthday." "Don't talk," she commanded, leaning over him to apply more pressure. "Save your strength." "No," he whispered, a faint, pained smile touching his lips. "I spent 20 years, waiting for this. If I don't make it, the empire is yours. Don't let them take it back." In that moment, the power dynamic shifted forever. She wasn't looking at a captor or a king, she was looking at a man who had built a world of violence just to keep a promise to a woman he loved. Maya realized then that her debt wasn't to her mother, and it wasn't to the Mafia. It was to the man who was currently dying to keep her safe. She leaned down and pressed her forehead against his, her voice fierce. "You aren't going anywhere, Dante Moretti. You still have a wedding night to finish." The sun rose over the Atlantic, casting a cold, gold light across the Black Estate, but inside the master suite, the air was still heavy with the scent of antiseptic and iron. Dante lay against the pillows, his face pale but his eyes, those sharp, obsidian eyes, were wide open and fixed on the woman standing at the foot of his bed. Maya no longer wore the wine-colored silk or the innocent white lace of a bride. She was dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit that matched the shadows of the room. "You're awake," she said, her voice devoid of the tremor that had defined her just days ago. "I am," Dante rasped, his voice a low vibration. He looked at the heavy gold signet ring sitting on the nightstand, the symbol of the Moretti line. It wasn't on his finger. "You opened the safe." "I did," Maya replied, walking toward him. She didn't offer him water or comfort. Instead, she held up a folder she had pulled from the vault behind her mother's portrait. I found the second contract, Dante. The one you didn't show me. The one my mother didn't sign. Dante's jaw tightened. For the first time since the wedding doors burst open, the Mafia king looked truly cornered. You told me I was a debt to be paid, she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You told me you were the monster keeping the other monsters away. But this contract shows that you were the one who leaked my location to the Dragons 6 months ago. You started the fire just so you could play the fireman and rescue me. Dante didn't deny it. He couldn't. The world was moving too slow, Maya. You were never going to leave that life on your own. I had to burn it down to make you see that your place was here, by my side. I see it now, Maya said, a cold smile touching her lips. I see everything. You thought you were molding a queen to sit beside you, someone to carry your legacy. But you made a mistake, Dante. You taught me too well how to spot a traitor. She leaned over him, her shadow stretching across the bed. The power in the room had shifted entirely. Dante was still the boss of the city, but in this house, in this moment, he was a man who had underestimated the woman he claimed to love. The Dragons are gone, she whispered. My father is in hiding. David is a memory. And the men outside? They aren't waiting for your orders anymore. They're waiting for mine. I told them you were incapacitated. Dante reached for her hand, his grip still weak but possessive. What are you going to do, Maya? Finish what the sniper started? No, she said, pulling her hand away and picking up the signet ring. She slid it onto her own thumb, the gold feeling heavy and right. I'm going to keep your promise to my mother. I'm going to be the monster. But I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it because the underground needs a ruler who doesn't need to burn churches to get what she wants. She walked toward the door, stopping only to look back at the man who had orchestrated her entire life. Rest, Dante. You've done enough. From now on, the Moretti name belongs to me. That was the shocking twist no one saw coming, least of all you. As she stepped out onto the balcony, the guards below snapped to attention. They didn't look for Dante. They looked at her. Maya didn't flinch. She looked out over the city she now controlled, the queen of the shadows, finally stepping into the light. Maya was no longer the girl who had been sold for a debt. She was the woman who had collected it. But as she looked at the man she had just usurped, one question remained: did she save the Moretti Empire, or did she just become the most dangerous monster in the city? If you think Maya made the right choice by taking the throne, hit that like button right now. But if you think she should have stayed loyal to Dante, drop a comment below. I want to know, who do you think is the real villain of this story? Trevor, Dante, or the new Queen of the Shadows? Before you go, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss our next story, where the disgraced CEO finds out his new assistant is actually the daughter of his biggest rival. Thanks for watching, and remember, in this world, trust is the only currency that matters.